Hello, Trail Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. We have part 2 with Elizabeth Guthrie, who has, since the last episode, episode 506, she was a Ph.D. candidate, and now she's officially earned her Ph.D. in natural medicine. And she comes back on the show to dive deeper into this discussion of using herbs as our own medicine at home, and we discuss how you can work with herbs for your own somatics, for your nervous system. So I know you'll love today's interview. I hope you go back and listen to episode 506, which was part 1. We just continued the discussion, so even if you didn't listen to 506, you'll still be able to gain lots of information from today's interview. And I apologize, my microphone is just a little bit off. It's still you're still able to hear everything and gain the knowledge from the episode. A knob got bumped, and so it's just a little bit off, and I apologize. I'm going to correct that and get it all fixed and sounding great again. Today I interviewed, so this interview took place a few weeks ago, which we're publishing right now, but today I just finished an interview with one of the top scientists around structured water and the enlemma, and I'm very excited to be publishing that, and that is going to be the next episode 508, so be sure to check that out. It's going to come out in the next few days. And Dr. Elizabeth Guthrie is giving us access to her free course. So we want to make sure that you guys know to go to learntruehealth.com/plants. That's learntruehealth.com/plants and sign up for her free class that she's giving on Saturday. And even if it's past the date, go ahead and go to that link, because I'll make sure that it forwards to the course she's giving and any future free talks she's giving. But this particular webinar is going to be fascinating. And if you have any interest in utilizing plants and learning more about natural medicine, learning more about emotional, mental, and physical health working with plants, then I invite you to check it out. I think you'll really like it. learntruehealth.com/plants takes you to sign up for her free talk coming this Saturday. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen from, whether it's the Apple Podcast app, Android, Google, Podbean, Spotify, even on Amazon Podcasts. There's all kinds of places, or just on the learntruehealth.com website. You could be listening from there. Wherever you're listening from, make sure that you subscribe so that you get the notifications for when episodes come out. I want to make sure that you definitely hear next week's episode. It's going to be amazing. I was just floored. There were several times where my jaw was on the floor, and I just can't wait to give you that information. With these interviews, it's like gold is coming out of the mouths of the guests that I have on, and I get so excited thinking about these little tidbits. Sometimes it's just one sentence. Someone says one sentence, and it is all the insight that was needed to spark the action, the mechanism of action for you to take your health to the next level. And certainly I learned so much from my guests that have taken my life to the next level. So I'm so thrilled to share this with you. I know today's interview will give you lots of gold, lots of insights as to what you can add to your life to enrich your life and your health and your continued growth in your well-being. And next week's episode's going to be amazing as well. So remember, go to learntruehealth.com/plants so you can get access to Dr. Elizabeth Guthrie's talk coming up soon. And have yourself a fantastic rest of your day and enjoy today's interview. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 507. I am so excited for today's guest. We have back on the show. I think it's the third time we've had you on the show.
Yes.
And now I can say PhD Dr. Elizabeth Guthrie, welcome back to the show. It's so good to have you. We recently published an episode with you where it was just before you got your credentials, and you were saying any day now I might find out. And then of course, like right after it was days after I saw
Right.
you on Facebook going, "Yay, I got it." So you've been PhD for a while now. Although I just published that episode, it was actually a few months ago. So it's been a few months and so much has happened in your life, and I'm really excited to have you back on the show because what you teach is a type of medicine that is so accessible. We actually all used to use it. Our ancestors, only a few generations ago, had such a vast knowledge, and we've lost it in the last 100 years because of, and I don't want to get into the I'll sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's the truth that there was a concerted effort by those who owned the pharmaceutical companies to make it so that we didn't practice natural medicine and instead we focused on just going to the doctor and buying drugs that were petroleum based patented drugs. And 3 generations later, we have no idea what herbs do, other than maybe drinking some peppermint tea. And yet, right in your backyard, you have the access to amazing herbs. My friend last year got stung by a wasp really bad, and a friend of his who is, I believe he is First Nations person, Native American, or has that background. He turned to my friend and said, "Oh, go grab that yarrow right there, chew it up, and put it on the wound, put it on the bite." And my friend, who was in immense pain, did it, and within seconds, it felt like the pain just went away. And he goes, "What was that?" And his friend was like, "Yeah, yarrow. It grows everywhere and really good for." And he starts listing off all these things, and it was right there. He got stung, and he didn't even have to take a step. It was like the yarrow was the medicine, the cure to the problem was right there at his fingertips. And this is what it's like in our backyard. You could just reach out, you could just walk 10 paces, reach out, touch an, or as long as you don't have just like a manicured lawn, you could reach
Right.
out and you could grab something that has wonderfully beautiful medicinal properties. There's trees that I know in our area that grow these seeds that fight parasites. Like there's the things that what we think are weeds that are growing up between the cracks in the cement, make wonderful poultices for eczema and for the bug bites and for calming fevers, and just the list goes on and on. It's amazing that we could just take a little bit of time, learn from Elizabeth today, and begin to cultivate this excitement around how we can use plant medicine to support our body's ability to heal itself, and even in some cases in first aid, just to calm the nervous system and bring in nutrients, decrease inflammation, swelling, and pain. So we have lots to talk about today. I'm really excited that Elizabeth is doing a free introductory event to plant medicine. You're going to learn so much. I want you to sign up for it. Go to learntruehealth.com/plants. That's learntruehealth.com/plants. I just tried to make it as simple as possible to type in instead of having to type in plant medicine. So just type in learntruehealth.com/plants, and that'll take you to her free introductory event where she's going to teach you lots of great information, even more than we're going to discuss today. So welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. So take us back to the moment we hung up the last time. And then days later, you finally got your credentials, your very hard earned PhD in natural medicine. Let us know what's happened since, what has unfolded since.
Wow. It's been a lot of different fascinating discussions with people. I got my PhD in natural medicine because it was accessible to me. It was something that I was able to do. I was able to really buckle down and do a lot of hard work around it. And it allows me to I've learned a lot from it about natural medicine in general, and of course my focus in plant medicine and the way that it can help after significant emotional distress or trauma, depending on the situation. And it is a little bit different from naturopathic medicine, right? Where the focus is there are naturopathic medical schools in both America and Canada that can teach you how to become almost like a primary care physician. This was more research based, but
Hmm.
it's been really helpful in my practical application as well, because I do support people in a clinic setting to help them to find out what their bodies need, what's going to help them the most. And I've really, the last, I guess it's been about 9 months. It has been a whirlwind. um, I got to teach a class for the American Herbalist Guild on polyvagal theory and herbalism. I've begun to train in somatic practices. So I was already doing some somatic work. And of course, I've been training for yoga therapy and things like that. But I've really started to do these professional level trainings with Dr. Peter Levine in somatic practices in order to better merge plant medicine and what's happening in the body, how we can embody, really come in contact with our body and really get to that point where we feel embodied, so that then our intuition is a little bit clearer. When we look out into nature and we look at the different rhythms that are happening in nature, we look at the things that are occurring, the seasons, or sometimes the doctrine of signatures with the plants and the way that the plants look, or the things that we're called to. If we are more centered in ourselves and we understand a little bit about the plants around us, it becomes easier for us to intuitively reach for the right things at the right time. And
Mm.
that's a lot of the work that I've been focused on.
Love it. Well, since we talked, I've been doing tea a lot with my son, who he gravitates towards them much more intuitively than even I do.
Oh,
And it's cool because he can be, well, he's very he knows who he is. Let's just say it that he's very sure of himself, and he's very grounded in knowing who he is. So he just
right.
knows what he likes and what he doesn't like. And he asks for tea, and that's so cool. So we've been playing around with the different teas, and he loves sleepy time tea. All those herbs that are just calming, soothing right before bed. And I notice he does definitely seem to just ease into bedtime a bit better. So we each share a cup of sleepy time tea. Now on the back it says, "Do not let children drink it." And I noticed that after about the fifth time we were
Oh, no.
drinking it, and I was like, "Oh no, why?" It's not like I'm giving him 5 tea bags. It's like it's not strong. I'm not making a strong one,
Right.
but I was like, why is it saying this? So maybe you could enlighten me. Are there teas that they sell on the shelves of the stores, just like pre-made kind of tea mixes that are like unsafe for certain ages? Obviously, I'm not feeding it to an infant. My son's 70 pounds, and
Right.
he's drinking 1 cup. So maybe you could enlighten us on that. And well, we've really enjoyed that. He likes picking his own herbs and making tea, like peppermint. He loves picking fresh peppermint, and
Yes.
he'll make his own teas without me prompting him. He kind of just knows how to do it, which is amazing. He's got this innate knowledge. And then lately I've been making a turbo moon tea elixir, where I've mixed like 15 different herbs. I felt really drawn to that Ayurvedic mixture of let's see, I've got like it's like 15 of them, so I don't know if I can name them all off, but I've got like licorice root, dandelion root, a ton of turmeric, cumin, cardamom, nutmeg, cinnamon, clove, ginger. The list goes on and on. And then I blend them all up. Pepper, of course. I blend it all up with some coconut milk and water, and then I put it in the fridge, and it becomes this thick, congealed, very very thick substance. And then so it's a concentrate, and then I just take a spoonful of that. Oh, and ashwagandha, a ton of ashwagandha. I take a spoonful of that, put it in a mug of hot water, and I stir it, and then that's a tea. And my body loves it. It's
Oh,
so calming, so relaxing. I fed some to my husband last night, and he fell asleep within 5 minutes, snoring on the
oh,
couch. I was like, this stuff's really good. But then anytime I do this moon tea, I call it moon tea, but there's way more in it than normal moon tea. Um, I just notice that my nervous system loves it, and I have even better sleep. And of course my husband, it just knocked him right out, which is wonderful. It's also a lot of the stuff in there helps detoxify, and it's anti-parasitic, and it's anti-inflammatory, and it's adaptogenic herb, so it's helping to like stabilize the body. But ashwagandha is good for men and women. I always thought it was just women. Then I started reading about how ashwagandha is good for men. I thought, oh, I'm going to feed this to my husband, and he loves it. So, yeah, so you've inspired us to play with herbs since we talked. So thank you for that. Yeah. So okay. So you came up with this course that the introductory event, and then the whole course that comes after it. So, fill us in, like what are we going to learn, or can we dive into what you are so excited to teach us today?
Well, I think it's really interesting because your comments about your son and his intuitive sense towards the plants and making the teas and choosing the things that is really drawn to in that moment. That is a natural intuition that we all have. And I believe that a lot of the times, one of the reasons that we have this kind of deeper homesickness, this deeper sense of I don't quite feel like I'm in the right place, comes from our lack of connection to nature. When we look around us and we connect to nature, we connect to the rhythms of the universe and what's occurring. And when we can start to really find ourselves in that deeper relationship, at first it may just be like, oh, this is nice. But the more that we do it, the deeper our relationship becomes. And we can get to a point where that stillness actually becomes part of what we experience on a regular basis. And once we're at a place where we can embody the stillness of just like the knowing that these rhythms are a continual thing, this too shall pass, some of the stuff that we teach in mindfulness type practices, right? Then we can really get to a point where we can listen to our deepest consciousness and understand more about why we're here doing what we're doing, like what our purpose in life is, or the way that we could better connect to things, that kind of ancient wisdom that everybody holds, but we may not be able to access as easily when we're so disconnected to our natural state. And that's a lot of what we're talking about. Now, of course, we're getting into here's the different plants you can do for this, and here's the teas that you could talk about, or here's, different essential oils. But the core essence of this course, starting with this free introductory event, and then, of course, if you decide to come into the main course, we're really getting into tapping into that more natural, intuitive sense to help to build and strengthen that relationship with the plants that are around us and what that means for each of us individually.
So what herbs have you been featuring the last few months? What herbs have you been most excited about teaching or using yourself, or seeing that they're just so needed right now?
So it's interesting that you asked me that, because I've been chomping at the bit to talk about invasive species. We yes,
Good,
so we
yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, because think about it, like dandelion for a lot of people is considered invasive.
Mm.
And yeah, and it's the entire plant of dandelion is helpful.
Yes.
The new leaves that come out in the spring, they're nice on a salad as part of like a bitters. There's a lot of benefits to the root. You can get roasted dandelion root to add into
Mm-hmm.
your coffee for people who drink coffee, and like that's a really interesting flavor addition, and it has benefits. So there's all kinds of different ways you can use dandelion, and yet a lot of people see it as an invasive weed. One of my favorite plants, to answer your question, one of my favorite plants right now is the mimosa tree,
Yes.
Albizia julibrisson. And it's really funny because the woman that you shared on your Facebook, I know that woman. That's one of my one of the herbalists from our area.
Wow.
And she and I have a very similar view on mimosa,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people, they go, oh, it's so invasive, it's terrible, I hate it, I can't get rid of it. And I'm not saying that it's not very frustrating if it takes over and you don't want it to take over, But I was very excited this year when one finally popped up. My neighbors have one on the property line, and it's just like every year I've been like, okay, come here, come here. And this year one has finally popped up on the property. The bark and the flowers both have anxiolytic relaxing effects to them.
Mm.
And I love this plant. And I use it for flower essences. I use it in tincture form for those anxiolytic effects. So I am thrilled that this little baby has popped up on my property. And so we don't need to just see invasive species as a pain. Sometimes they're helping to change the soil. So a lot of the times these things that we consider invasive may actually be helping to amend the soil. And also, if we, even kudzu has some, I don't use it very much, but like kudzu has some properties that are beneficial. And so like those kinds of things we can harvest without having to worry about the sustainability of it. Some plants we have to be more careful with because we've over harvested them, but a lot of these invasive plants that have benefits, either nutritional benefits or more of the medicinal side of thing, herbal medicine side of things, whatever that is, we can harvest these things and use them. And it's really, I'm sorry, I'm nerding out over here. I recently was reading in a book by Pascal Baudard. It's his new book called Wildcrafted Vinegars. And one of the things that he mentions is that there's all kinds of different plants. He used to live kind of out in California, and there were all kinds of different plants that would just grow on the roadside and all over the hills that had nutritional value to them, but people saw them as weeds and never did anything with them. And, when people are concerned about, are we going to have enough access to food? Are we going to have enough, capacity to, take care of ourselves and things like that? So maybe more on the prepper side of things, but still, like, we can look at those, and there are certain foods that can come from these things that we call weeds. So there's medicinal benefits, there's survivability benefits, and I encourage you, whatever you have around you, get out and start learning about it and start understanding like what are these plants, not just the native plants, but like what are the invasive plants that we have in our area that might have benefits, because sometimes you can find some really strong allies in those plants that we might normally think of as kind of a pain.
So the Mimosa pudica bark, you said the word anxiolytic. Can you
Yes.
explain what that means? So if we were to take the bark and make a tea out of it and drink it, what
Yes.
effect would it have on us?
So it helps to reduce the feelings of anxiety. It is a very kind of cooling, relaxing type energetics that help to bring the nervous system back down. So this gets a little bit into the polyvagal theory, right? The sympathetic state is that fight or flight response. If somebody is really into a fight or flight mode, then the mimosa can be very helpful on that front.
Now, I can hear people saying, but what if I poison myself because I don't know what I'm doing? Or what if I drink too much of it or have a bad reaction? And, they're thinking, oh, I have to call poison control or something. Can you just maybe relieve our tension around the fear of using plant medicine, because we don't, we're so used to like picking up a prescription bottle and seeing how many to take and knowing that it's controlled, even though like tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people a year die of properly using prescription medication, not the deaths, not including the deaths where they're overusing them, but there's we think prescribed medicine is safe, and it's not. There's also risk to that as well. More risk because it's the safeguards from nature have been taken out, which I think we've talked about before, but it's worth repeating that the willow bark was where we get aspirin from. And willow bark in its whole state, if you were to make a tea out of that, for example, or a tincture, if you consume too much, it will cause you to throw it up, right? So that it helps prevent you from overdosing. Whereas aspirin, they removed those things in nature that help us. Now, I'm not saying every plant has this safeguard, because obviously there's many plants out there you can eat and it'll kill you, but
Right.
there's even more plants out there that you can eat and it'll help you, right? So
Right.
it's like snakes. Most snakes won't kill you. It doesn't mean all snakes won't
Right.
kill you. It doesn't mean all snakes will kill you either. So a bit of knowledge goes a long way, and having a healthy respect for plants, just like having a healthy fear of medicine. We should of human made medicine, we should or chemical made medicine, we should just use more caution and look into each thing more. So for all of us who have a Mimosa pudica tree in our backyard and want to just run out there right now and start gnawing on the bark, tell us about the safeguards of beginning to use plant medicine, just so that we can be rest assured that like my son, he just will, without any thought, will run outside, pick some bush and start eating it because he
Oh,
loves
no.
plants. And I'm like, sweetie, there might be something in this garden that could kill you. I know there's like at least one plant that is in the Washington state. I mean, it's killed one person in the last 60 years. It's not, but it can make
Right.
people very
Right.
sick. And I've told him, like, not every plant is safe. We should really know what we're putting in our mouth, right?
Right.
But
Right.
he's like, well, you told me vegetables are good, and this is green, so I'm just going to eat it. He likes foraging, but he does it without me. So he just comes home chewing on something, and then I have to say, what did it look like? Hold on, let me look it up. So
Right.
so we want to go in our backyard or out in nature, and or just go to the health food store. Maybe sometimes start there. Can you teach us a bit about the safeguards, though, while we get into this?
Yeah, so I encourage people to look into like local guides in their plants, what they have locally growing. There's all kinds of different books that are available to give you an idea as to the safe dosing of different plants.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, when you start looking into this, a lot of the dosing is based off of somebody who weighs about 150 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, children's dosing is a little bit different. But when it comes to an adult, usually if you're looking at a bottle, it's kind of based off of somebody that is 150 pounds. So if you're heavier than that, sometimes you'll need to take more. But when you get into that level of like, I'm taking capsules and I'm taking a lot of it, and maybe there's some extracts or maybe there's something else, that's where I think it's really helpful to find a clinical herbalist in your area and work with them to learn a lot of these safeguards, a lot of these things that we're finding out. I think what we got into talking about last time was turmeric, and the fact that there are some extracts now that may be giving people problems. We don't quite know yet. And so, like, is the whole plant, the whole root safe, or are these extracts, these curcuminoid extracts, are they giving people problems? Like, what's happening there? And you can work with a clinical herbalist to kind of get a better feel for that. But there's a lot of plants that we can get into, most of which are in the teas that we see at the grocery store, like we were talking about, that are generally recognized as safe. Like, they're generally seen to, for most people, they're not going to be an issue. If you have a lot of chronic illness, if you have a lot of unusual allergies, that would be a good time to say, hey, I think I am going to at least, try to get an idea of what I want to do together, take it to an herbalist, and just like pay for time to sit there and talk through it with them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not like a full consultation, but maybe it's almost like a mentorship session. Consultations are good too, but like if you're already kind of taking it into your own hands, you already have an idea, maybe you sit down for an hour of mentorship with them where they can kind of help keep you in that safe range.
Mm-hmm.
But for generally speaking, if you're in a situation where you're relatively healthy and you're trying to just start to explore these things, then a lot of like what you're talking about with peppermint, right? Peppermint is relatively safe for most people. There are going to be some people that may have some issues with acid reflux with it, but for the most part, people are going to be okay, and it's going to be fine. Lavender, chamomile for most people. So there's a lot of these different herbs, and a lot of the adaptogen herbs are very safe for most people. So like there's a lot of those herbs that you can learn a bit about the dosing, and very quickly benefit from them. Like for instance, with the bark, it's about 10 grams into a decoction. And that's what people can use. Now it's going to be lower if you put it into a tincture. But it's a pretty decent amount of it that is considered at this point safe to use. So it's definitely, gosh, like this is an entire conversation in itself, like safety and safety buffers. And, and I think it's just really important to recognize that don't necessarily read an article on the internet and assume that that's right. Go back to who are these people who are herbalists who have been doing this for years or who have credentialing. And notice I use that separately because there's a lot of people that don't have credentialing who are very good herbalists and have the experience. So both of those things are valid career paths. And so look for things like KP Khalsa's books. It's a little bit older, but Louise Tinney was a master herbalist that's got some good reference guides. Obviously Rosemary Gladstar's work is really amazing. And I'm freezing up on the man who did the adaptogens book. David Winston has an adaptogens book if you're into that. So there's all kinds of different places you can go to find out what people are generally seeing as a safe dosing.
And they can also go to you.
Right. They can. I'm here. I don't want to be totally focused on myself as like perfect. Like I know all of this. A lot of this I'm learning from, right? I'm standing on the shoulders of giants with a lot of this information. Yeah. We have a lot of indigenous healers that have given us a lot of information. And we've got a lot of these people who have really studied and codified like what these dosages look like. But yeah, absolutely. And there are ways to look at this from a more energetic angle. So the first interview I did with you was on chakras and talking about energy healing, because at the base, I am very much an energy healer. And so there are ways to get into plant medicine where we are focused on very low dosing or drop doses that are focused more on the energetic terrain and less on the chemical constituents. And that's another, there's just so many different ways that you can go with this. And yes, that is absolutely an option as well.
So bringing us back to the Mimosa pudica plant, which I first learned because I had Dr. Jay Davidson on the show, and he talked about using it in conjunction with other herbs, but he used it from Ayurvedic medicine to rid himself of like 12-inch worms that were parasites in him. And then he created a line of parasite cleansing supplements in which Mimosa pudica was a main component of that. Mimosa pudica seed, I should say. Yeah. So I became very excited about Mimosa pudica, but then learning that it's sort of like dandelion. We can use the flower, we can use the leaves, we can use the seed, we can use the bark, right? Tell us about the other parts of the Mimosa pudica. So let's pretend, 20 years from now, when you have this thriving Mimosa pudica tree in your backyard, what are you going to do with all the properties of this tree and beyond the bark, helping us calm ourselves from anxiety, and the seeds which have anti-parasitic properties? What about the other? What healthy properties does the other aspects of the plant have?
So Mimosa pudica is actually a different species from Albizia julibrissin. It's very similar though. But the mimosa that's called Mimosa pudica is actually the one like what you're talking about, where I think it's used a lot in Ayurveda and TCM, maybe.
Oh, so these are like cousins.
Yeah, they're kind of cousins.
Got it.
And so Albizia, which is, you'll hear it sometimes called silk tree, but it's also called mimosa here in the South. But like this is our main invasive mimosa is the Albizia julibrissin, and it is the bark and the flowers are the two things that I use most frequently. So with pudica, I think you use the seeds, and maybe the roots is another aspect that you can get into. But for this plant, the Albizia julibrissin, that's the one that I work with most, I tend to get the flowers in the late spring when they bloom and tincture them, and then go back in the fall when it's time to trim it back and trim it back and take the bark. And I do it right before it starts to get really cold, because obviously the energetics move into the roots when we get into late fall and early winter. But in the mid fall, probably mid to late September, I'm going to trim it back and take the bark and put it into the same tincture I put the flowers into. And then I use that as one of the relaxing, cooling herbs in formulas that I use specifically to support people who are dealing with that sympathetic fight or flight state. So that's a lot of it for me, because a lot of the times I'm working with people that have a lot of autoimmune issues or maybe chronic pain and things like that. But a lot of the work that we're doing actually starts in the nervous system. And so when I'm using things like Mimosa and things like that, I'm not worried as much about the anti-inflammatory properties. They're good. But what I'm really focused on with it is the cooling and relaxing properties that it offers the nervous system to help bring them back into balance, so that their body is no longer in that alarm state. So that their body can start doing what it naturally does to reduce inflammation and flush everything out and get them back into balance. So that's kind of where I use it. I know there are other people that use it other ways, but that's one of my favorite ways to work with it.
Very cool. I love it. And it's so interesting about the idea that an invasive, not noxious species, but an invasive species could actually be there for our benefit to um, help balance the ecosystem or prepare the soil or something maybe medicinally that we're needing.
Right,
Can you
right.
think of
And
other examples of
oh,
that?
go
I'm
ahead.
just there's a lot of invasive thistles, and I'm just in Washington State. I'm thinking about the invasive trees and plants, not the noxious ones, not the poisonous
Right,
ones, but
right.
the ones that are they're safe to eat, but they're just kind of taking over. And I'm just wondering if you could share, if you know a bit more about other ones that you are known medicinal invasive species.
So I can speak mostly from the South, right? Because that's
Yeah.
where I'm at. But like kudzu, kudzu is rampant here. And there are traditional uses for kudzu. There's kudzu jelly. There's reason that some people use it for headaches and things like that. That there's all kinds of things like that. Somebody said English ivy, but I've not played with that. I've not dug into that. Um, and I'm trying to think of like ones that might be out there as well. Chickweed, like, is chickweed something that y'all have?
We've got like English ivy, knotweed, Scots broom, ragwort, uh, kitsap weeds. There's a lot of different thistles, although I don't know their names. Um, Dogwood. Those trees
Yeah.
take over everywhere. Um,
Oh,
well, there's something like you said. It's very regional,
right. And
right?
that's
And
the beauty of getting out there
yeah,
and really learning from a local herbalist. Now, I'm happy to help anybody, get started on that side of things. A lot of the work that I do doesn't consist of necessarily like specifically um it's more about the connection once you've found plants that you're interested in. It's more about encouraging that exploration of those plants. So now
right.
locally here, I've got like chickweed, like I was just saying, like we that is invasive, but it's edible. There are so many different things you can do with it. And there's all kinds of stuff like that all across the world
Okay, so let's talk
where
about chickweed. I can't imagine. I'm gonna Google it so I can know what it looks like. But let's talk about it. So you can eat it. What does it do? What is it good for? What does it help people with?
so chickweed is, oh gosh, like I tend to use it just as like part of the food. Like that's the beauty of a lot of these plants, is that there's there's a medicinal side to them, but then you also have the fact that a lot of these things are edible, and they can be fermented into really interesting um, you know culinary things that people can use. A lot of the times chickweed is something that people are talking about for digestion. I see it a lot in this because it is a spring herb, right? So like it's kind of part of those clearing herbs that we use early in the spring.
Mm.
And some people use it to try to help with the kind of systemic inflammation that leads to um, like circulatory problems and oh, I can't think of the official word for it, but obesity and things like that. But I don't go too far into that because I have a doctorate, I have a PhD, but I'm not a medical doctor. So I'm less worried about diagnosing somebody with diabetes
Mm-hmm.
or metabolic syndrome. That's the word I couldn't think of. Like I'm not looking to diagnose somebody with metabolic syndrome and say, "Oh, here are the herbs that can help you." I'm more about what are the rhythms of the seasons that we're in. So in the spring we eat chickweed, we eat dandelion, um, leaves. You know, we do things like that to help clear the system, to help clear the congestion from winter, to help our
Mm-hmm.
body to prepare for the spring energies that are coming up. If somebody comes to me and they've got metabolic syndrome, I'm less worried about metabolic syndrome and more worried about what are the energetic patterns happening in their body. Is there a lot of stuff? Usually somebody's coming to me because they've got some form of trauma or emotional struggles, things like that, that they really want help with, mental health type things. So we're looking at the nervous system first, like what's happening in the nervous system. Is there a lot of heat and irritation in the nervous system that we can use cooling things? Like chickweed's kind of cooling, right? And it can help to kind of cool the body down and bring it back into balance. And that's where some of the polyvagal stuff comes into play with dorsal vagal versus sympathetic. And if somebody's in a sympathetic state, there are certain herbs that energetically have benefits for that sympathetic state versus um, the herbs that are going to be more helpful for the dorsal vagal state, where somebody's body is almost too cold. There's almost not enough movement, and their nervous system has almost slowed down too much. And we have to warm it back up and bring movement back in. So, a
So,
lot of the things, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just to clarify for those who aren't or just need a refresher in dorsal vagal, polyvagal, fight or flight, sympathetic versus rest and digest, parasympathetic, or maybe like you said, two, they're they're having trouble getting a proper vagal tone. So they're like when we need sympathetic, when we need that, I don't want to say fight or flight, but when we need that cortisol, we need that stimulus, right? There's healthy
Right.
cortisol levels. It's just not there. So for me, I had really bad end stage chronic adrenal fatigue, so bad that if like something were to happen, I wouldn't have been able to jump up and run out of a burning building. Like I just could, I didn't have the get up and go, right? And then
Right.
out of nowhere, I'd have these adrenaline dumps where I'd feel like I was dying, and that would happen occasionally. Like my body was like, "Okay, come on, let's go, come on, let's go. All right, let's just release the cortisol all at once."
Right.
And
Right.
it was dysregulated. It
Right.
wasn't that was not healthy, and it took nutrition and dietary changes and lifestyle changes, and then the final thing really was minerals, remineralizing my body. But it took a lot of healthy changes to get me back to where I was balanced again. And thinking about the herbs that I was regularly using, like I can remember cinnamon. I was taking cinnamon capsules. It had a few other things in it, but it was some minerals packed in cinnamon, and that was brilliant for me. The minerals and the cinnamon is the only herb I can remember. I know that there was a few other ones. This was like
Right.
12 years ago, but I was very exhausted all the time and didn't have to get up and go. So for me, I was like the other side, right? So we have people
Right.
who are living on cortisol, they're living on adrenaline. They're kind of tired, wired at night. Sometimes they can't bring themselves down, right? And they're maybe
Right.
go 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 during the day, but then when they need to relax, they can't. And then they get to the point where they're burnt out. So then when they need to get up and go, they can't. Right. So
Right.
so the vagal nerve, which is, I mean, it's brilliant. We definitely want to talk a bit more about that. We've discovered it before, but it's so worth talking about more. Wonderful nerve that runs from the brain to the gut, and there's so much to discuss because there's a direct connection. We've got like a brain in our gut, we have a brain in our heart, and we have a brain in our head. And that's, we're just discovering what we knew in natural medicine and in indigenous medicine for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. We're now just discovering it in the West, that there's but bundles of nerves in the heart and in the gut, and
Right.
that they're communicating to the brain. We used to think the brain just tells the body what to do,
Nope.
but we actually have a brain in our heart, a brain in our gut that's telling our brain stuff. That's I don't want to say like it doesn't have a consciousness like thinking like we do in our head, but that if you look at I know sometimes I go all over the place, but it makes sense. It makes sense in my brain. There's a book really great written a long time ago, and I read it back in 2005, and it still sits with me. It's called The Holographic Universe, and the holographic universe talks about how we think that our all of our thinking's in our head, but it's actually stored holographically through our whole body. And that's it's so beautiful, this idea that our nervous system's actually throughout our whole body, and we can store memories, because they'll have, people will have transplants, like a heart transplant, and then they'll have memories from the person they got it from. There was
Hmm.
even a little girl who had memories. She got a transplant, and she had perfect memories of the murder, and they were able to use them in court and convict the murderer. And that was the organ that she received from the murdered victim. And there's several other cases in which we've seen that memories exist outside the brain because they're stored holographically through the whole nervous system. So that's why I love the vagal nerve, because it's this super highway from the gut to the brain, and that there's more going on in the gut that we need to acknowledge, like thyroid hormone is turned over, produced in the gut, that we always think it's just the thyroid, just in the thyroid, but there's actually stuff in the gut that's very important. Serotonin, something like upwards of 70% of our serotonin is made in the gut. There's so much going on. The 6 pounds of bacteria in our gut that's making so many of our nutrients for us from our food. So you eat that McDonald's, that's what you're using to build your cells, but that's also what you're using to build your microbiome and feed your microbiome. And you feed the wrong microbiome, a bunch of sugar and flour. The bad microbiome is going to produce bad chemicals. So I could go on and on, but that vagal nerve is so important on an emotional level, a mental level, a physical level, energetic and spiritual level for our being. So yes, so there's my little soapbox rant about how much I love the how much I love the vagal nerve. But you talk about the vagal nerve when it comes to herbs,
Hmm.
and how we can acknowledge, okay, I'm kind of running on empty. How can we restore ourselves? Or okay, I'm running, like my body's running like there's no tomorrow, and I need to calm myself and put myself in healing mode. When we're in fight or flight, we're not really in healing mode. Our body shuts off enzymatic processes for long-term healing in order to survive the day, survive the fight or the flight. So we want to bring restoration, because it's good to have the ability to fight or flight when we need. It's good to have the rest when we need. So we have to bring ourselves back into balance, and that's what I love, is you teach us how to think about plants as our support system for bringing the nervous system back into check.
Yeah, and there's a lot of nuance to that. And that's some of what we get into in the course, right? Is like, well, if you have this going on, then is it sympathetic? Is it dorsal vagal? The sympathetic being fight or flight, the dorsal vagal being the part of the vagal nerve or the vagus nerve that creates the freeze response, that shutdown, right? And so, what do we do when we're having those responses? How do we balance that back out? And those responses are healthy in certain situations, but like you said, like what's happening for a lot of us, especially with the life that we have to live to survive in today's society, in a lot of situations, that gets thrown off. And a lot of that is being held in different parts of our nervous system. And a lot of the frustrations or the traumas or whatever else, the memories, as you said, like with the holographic body, that's getting held in other places in our nervous system.
Mm.
And so a lot of the conversation becomes, what are the herbs that we're drawn to? What are the plants we're drawn to? Because we can talk about medicinal plants, but like we can also have plant friends that we don't eat, but the energy, the resonance between them and us is something that you can't replace. And it feels comfortable and it feels safe. A lot of the times when you've been through a lot and things have been very, very bad, chaotic, there's good chaos, there's bad chaos. But when you've been through something that's overwhelmingly chaotic, um, sometimes it can begin to feel like this is too much. Everything feels like I can't get to a point where I know what's going to happen next. And if you have a plant ally, a plant buddy, if you will, but it sounds fancier to call it an ally, but like
Emotional support plant.
right, it becomes an emotional support plant. And I have some of those. Like I have this blood leaf that like I don't use it for anything nutritional based. I don't use it for anything in the medicinal realm. But the plant itself, I feel comfortable with that plant. And when I'm around that plant, I get the same feeling from that plant. And so now that becomes almost a regulation tool for me. So there's this idea in polyvagal theory called co-regulation. And this is when a person, usually we talk about it with adults and children, right? If the adult can consciously allow themselves to stay in that ventral vagal state, which is the part of the vagus nerve that helps us feel connected, it allows us to go into rest and digest where the healing can occur. If the adult is able to consciously do things to help themselves stay in that state, and their child is dysregulated, the child can begin to see the adult and see the adult's facial expressions, their body movements, and they will begin to regulate. And if the adult can continue to keep themselves in that ventral vagal state, it helps the child to regulate. And adults can do this for each other. But I have begun to realize that you can get some of that from plants. It's not quite the same thing as being around another mammal, so on and so forth. But like you can get some of that from plants. If there is a plant that you enjoy, that you feel safe enough to really get into that place where you can begin feeling healed, that connection is important. So in this course that I'm doing, we're not just talking about, use this for this nervous system state, use this to help your digestive system. We are talking about that some. We might talk a little bit about the different plants that people bring to the table, depending on what they've got going on, so on and so forth. But we're really, the core of this is there are all kinds of ways that you can learn from different books, or I can teach you about the different herbs. At the end of the day, what really begins to matter, once you understand enough safety to keep yourself safe, like we're not eating datura over here, but once you understand that and you're able to keep yourself safe within working with these plants, then there's a whole world to explore that allows us to realign our nervous system, realign our body in general, and get back to a place where we can listen to our intuition and decide what our tea needs to look like this morning. What are the plants that I'm being drawn to right now? Because once our nervous system is back in alignment and that vagus nerve is feeding the brain the right information again, then our subconscious can begin to direct us towards the things that we need on a regular basis.
So can you give us like beginner 101 going into the grocery store? I hate to say grocery store, but like, cause I only go to the holistic grocery stores.
Right.
So
right.
I'm like, I go to the grocery stores like that have the bulk section of herbs. And I'm like,
Right.
I'd like a spoonful of ashwagandha today. Sometimes I'll buy the big bulk things. And sometimes I know I'm not going to go through this herb enough. I've learned my lesson. So I'll just go to the bulk section and get like, I'm just getting 2 tablespoons of this root, because I'm not buying a $50 bag of it. So,
Right.
but yeah, I have an apothecary near me as well, and they sell so many herbs, dried herbs in bulk, as well as tinctures. But I like to start when I'm working with an herb. I like to start with the herb itself without it being a tincture, because I can ease into it. If it's new to me, it's like
Right.
like tea is something that is so gentle, and then I'll get into a tincture for bigger things. I like to think of it this way. the the size of the medicine should reflect the size of the problem. I know several people with cancer, and they're like, which tea should I drink? I'm like, lady, this is when you bring out the sledgehammer. Like, this is when you want to like go big and go 100%, and you got to like, change your diet and your lifestyle and bring everything to it. But if I'm like, I feel a little stressed, I don't need to bring the sledgehammer. That's
Right.
something like the body, like that's what I like about homeopathy or Bach flower remedies. It's, let's bring something, a gentle energy to nudge the body back into balance. And those are very powerful medicines in and of themselves, energetic medicines, but they're they're not a sledgehammer necessarily. Like you can do it gently. The way you do it properly, you do it gently. So with tea, with a full herb, I can make a tea and just experience it. And then I can go from there. So let's say the listeners are kind of like, let's say everyone's had peppermint tea, right? Everyone's had some experience with general herbs. What would you say if they could walk into a holistic supermarket or an apothecary, and what are your kind of like five favorites to have in the medicine cabinet, for those who want to just take it up one more notch beyond chamomile and peppermint and lavender?
Mm. So one that could be interesting, and a lot of these, I will say, you do have to explore and see if it works for you, right? Because again, depending on your nervous system state, depending on your underlying energetics, there's all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of different caveats to different options.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them that could be really interesting is Damiana. Damiana is normally thought of as an aphrodisiac.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's a really very almost spicy in smell, but it has a very warming effect. And now I will tell you, if you've been through a lot of trauma and you naturally tend to dissociate, Damiana is not something you want to try.
Oh.
But for people who are not experiencing that, Damiana may be something you want to go play with and see how it makes you feel. Holy basil is
Mm.
generally a great one for almost anybody. You can use any of the three subspecies and usually get very good results. It's not an official adaptogen by um the whatever the
the
fancy
the
version. Yeah,
I was
but
gonna
it's
say the National American Adaptogenic Society.
yeah, I can't think of like the right phrase for it, but like it's not an official adaptogen. If you look at it from the definition that like David Winston uses for adaptogens, he's one of the foremost experts in my mind on adaptogens. But it is adaptogenic. So it has a lot of those qualities that help the body to adapt to different stressors. It does kind of build that buffer for people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can be a fantastic one for just about anybody. Rhodiola is good if you
Mm.
are dealing with a lot of the spaciness, that dorsal vagal kind of shutdown. Now, if you are like me and you run on the sympathetic nervous system side, then that's going to be a little bit too much and it may actually make you feel more anxious.
Mm.
But for a lot of people, rhodiola can be a very, very beneficial option. Hawthorn is usually thought of as like a heart herb, but it doesn't have to just be heart. Like there's also kind of like that warming energetics behind it that's really beneficial for a lot of people. So if you're dealing with a lot of burnout or compassion fatigue, that sense of just like I'm tired of trying to be caring, that happens. I
Wow.
mean, it's a thing, and hawthorn is a great one for that as well.
I kind of feel like
It
I
also
hit a bit of that. Sorry to interrupt. I hit a bit of that
no, you're good.
after the last 3 years because I'm
Yeah.
so empathetic, and there's been
Hmm.
so much turmoil the last 3 years that I
Right.
found myself becoming cynical. And that's not
Oh yeah.
me, right? But that's when you
Right.
describe like compassion burnout. I'm like, wow, that's that. I think. I mean, I'm not like I feel like I've recovered somewhat from it because we've had a bit of relief. But, the last few years have been pretty intense. And I think people have been, I mean, there's so much polarization in families.
Right.
And it's kind of disgusting when you think about how politics and how we've all, I don't think this was handled very well on any side. It doesn't matter what side you're taking. No one handled this well, especially the governments, right? And so people who loved each other were fighting and at each other's throats and saying really nasty things that we all kind of regret. But looking at the last few years, thinking that even if you tried to stay out of it, even if you're like just neutral party, you we all felt horrible for those who were suffering, and suffering from loss, suffering from having been through illness, suffering from isolation, suffering from having fights with family members, or losing their job or whatever. It hasn't been that great the last few years, and I find a lot of people are acting like they have amnesia. What is that when you go through trauma and then you just kind of like, I'm just going to compartmentalize that in part of my brain and lock it away and
Right.
not think about it anymore, and then they're like, we're just back to pre 19 or 19. See, I've gone back way more years.
Yeah.
My brain's like, screw the 2000s, let's go back to the 90s. But like my brain is like, so that we're back in 2019, right? We kind of like skipped over the last few years, and that's trauma. And I really think the globe has been through trauma. And if you haven't personally, if you just somehow managed to isolate in a cave and not go through trauma, you've witnessed trauma. You've witnessed people experience it, and instead of locking it away, because so many of us have to go to just, you have to keep doing what you're doing to survive and keep a roof over your head. You got to still go to work. You got to come home and do your laundry. Like, your days off aren't spent healing. Your days off are spent getting groceries and taking care of the kids or the husband or yourself and your cats or whatever, your dog. But no one has sat back and gone, okay, as a society, like, let's start healing from this. It's just like, nope, let's go back to normal. Come on, go back to work, go back to work. So I think that acknowledging, and that's what we talked about a bit in the last interview, acknowledging the trauma that we've been through, and then like, we can use herbs and plants as a support, but we need to acknowledge the last few years that there's some level of acute stress. And when you go through acute stress for years, there's a drain on the body. And I just realized when you said that, compassion fatigue, I was like, oh,
Right.
that's why, because I didn't like feeling cynical. That's not my nature. So I became the observer watching myself become cynical. And I'm like, this is very uncomfortable. This is not me. And that's,
Right.
I think the defense mechanism for having compassion fatigue. So, and I love hawthorn, and yes, it is wonderful for the heart, and but also because that is so anti-inflammatory. And as you're mentioning these herbs, I'm thinking about, it's not. We have to stop thinking about herbs like they're drugs.
Right.
Like, these are the effects and these are the side effects. No, 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 no. Drugs were copied from herbs, right? And herbs have so much more. So drugs they took the one chemical component or more from a plant, and then they stripped it of minerals. They stripped it of nutrients. They stripped it of the thousands of enzymes and of phytonutrients and phytochemicals that make plants beautiful, and then they use some kind of petroleum based chemical to then make a patented compound, and with all kinds of side effects, and the body just gets so confused when it's given drugs. Now, I like drugs to save someone's life. I'd rather you be on a drug and be alive than not and dead, right? So
Right.
so drugs have their place, but they should not be the first thing we jump to. And unfortunately, most people only know to go to one doctor, which is the drug-based doctor. And that's why my show features people like yourself from so many different paths, so listeners can know that there's more than one choice. We've been taught, because the mainstream medicine is the mainstream if you, yeah, again, I'm going to sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it's all true. Just go look it up. Uh, almost every single TV show, movie is produced by or owned by corporations that are either owned by or funded by the pharmaceutical industry. And so they have a reason for not featuring, like, could you imagine if there's a Grey's Anatomy but it's like plant-based medicine, herbal doctors? It'd be kind of, I think it'd be fun. It'd be a lot less drama because you're you're coming in to help people like meditate and calm, and here, have some tea and let's discuss this, and let's bring in the nutritious herbs to help, help yourself heal. I think it would be interesting, but it would make for really boring TV because we're not feeding into the drama of it all. So so
Yeah,
it's
and
it's
one of the things. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, the whole system, what we've been raised in, is designed to make us think that there's only one form of medicine. And that's part of the PR that has brainwashed us the last three generations. But if we go back to our great grandparents, they would kind of look at us like we're aliens, because they went to plants, just like as natural as breathing. They went to plants as herbs in their cooking, as herbs in their stews, soups, teas, as herbs that they would use to on a regular basis there through the seasons, like you talk about using plants in season. They would deworm all their animals, and then they would use the same herbs to deworm themselves. So these we had to use herbs to survive. That was our medicine. And um and I just want us as a society to recognize and to be taught that to this day, there are more options than just drug-based medicine. That plants has always been around, and that you can, like I said, you could walk out of your front door and grab a plant and probably have a wonderful time brewing a tea and supporting your body. Hawthorn, beautiful, love it. One of my friends used it to heal her heart condition, in addition to using other herbs. But hawthorn was her daily go-to. She made a huge, like, 4 liters of sun tea, and she'd just sip on it, and hawthorn was one of them. And it was so important to her because if she didn't drink it, she'd have heart palpitations.
It's an amazing herb. And one of the things that's really coming up for me as you're talking is remembering that a lot of the times people would, and of course, people knew like this plant was good for this, but there was also some intuition that came into play there. They could kind of, especially when people were first trying to figure it out, right? Like the plants, in a lot of the indigenous folklore, the plants speak to people and tell them what they're good for. And we have a lot of those pieces that I think people are working to reclaim at this point. And in some traditions, it was never lost. But for many of us, it was lost. And we're trying to reclaim that. And the last 3 years have really brought people to a point where they want to know that. Trauma thrives in isolation and in fear. And trauma occurs when things happen too much, too fast, and too soon, or when it's not enough, too slow, or too late. And we had a lot of that. We had a lot of isolation. We had a lot of unknowns. And we had things happening too fast or too late. There was a lot of that over the last 3 years. And a lot of people who had not struggled before are now struggling. And they have a lot of, whether it's related to things that they had happen, or if it's just related to the stress, there's a lot of brain fog, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of emotional struggle for people. And one of the things we can do to really start to heal from these moments of like compassion fatigue and things like that are to start turning back to nature and exploring what's around us. So what's in our backyard? Like you said, if it's not manicured and you've got like a more natural backyard, you're going to have plants in your backyard that are probably beneficial. You just have to learn about them, start to learn how to ID the items in your area. And the fifth herb that I was going to suggest isn't one, I don't know, maybe some of the other apothecaries have it. I haven't seen it a lot in our apothecaries here, but dandelion.
Mm-hmm.
because dandelion has several different parts to it. So like we talked about earlier, you can use the roots for certain things, you can use the leaves for certain things. The flowers make beautiful like teas and breads, and like people make dandelion cookies. So like there's all these different ways that you can use dandelion and the different parts of dandelion. So if you mindfully learn about it and you mindfully start trying, like what do I feel, not just emotionally, but what are the physical sensations that occur when I use the root versus how is it different when I use the flower head? What does that feel like? So for me, I have a downward rushing of energy. Like I can feel my nervous system almost like rushing, like bringing my attention downward, almost to my root chakra into the ground, which makes sense with the root being a little bit more grounded or connected to the earth. Whereas I feel a lot of like warmth in my chest when I'm using the flowers,
Mm.
which is interesting because from a chakra angle, I might have thought solar plexus, but for me, it's in the heart region with the flower. So these things, it's going to be different for everybody. But when we start noticing those sensations, what that brings to the table, the intuitive thoughts that we have behind those sensations, what are the emotions that those physical sensations create for us? What are the things that we're reminded of? And we can easily start to think, oh, well, and I like this because it helps me feel this way. I like this because when I'm feeling scatterbrained and I drink some tea that has dandelion root in it, I can feel my energy starting to settle back into a lower center of gravity, so I feel more focused. That's the kind of thing that people want to look for. And it's really hard in just this, we've got a couple of hours here where we're talking, and it's really hard to encompass that entire feeling. But that's where I would start playing with plants like that, just getting to know a little bit about them in order to notice what your response is to that plant. What is the intuitive feeling that you get? Do you hear something? Do you hear like a phrase, or do you get a visualization? I get a visualization of places sometimes, and that
Mm.
can tell me some about my relationship with that plant. And it doesn't always have to be a single plant. So if you're in an area that only has a grocery store and doesn't have like an apothecary section, you can still get a tea and notice. Now you're dealing with 3 or 4 plants at the same time, but you can still notice what sensations are created for you and how that relates to you, like what the intuitive thoughts that you're getting, what's happening on a somatic level, and all of that combined can start leading you towards, oh, this I need for this part of my healing journey, or oh, this is going to be a lifelong friend.
Now, one thing you're asking us to do is something that many of us really need to do and don't do is take a moment to turn off the devices, close our eyes, and just be in our body
Right.
and take a breath. That's why I love the idea of tea. It's so nourishing just to hold a cup. Now, of course, we're getting into summer and where it's blistering hot outside. You might not want to have a hot tea, and it's okay to make what's called sun tea, where you just put the bags or the herb itself into a big glass pitcher of clean water or purified water overnight, and you can place it in the sun, like in the window if you'd like, or just put it, just leave it in your kitchen, and it doesn't have to be hot. You could even serve it over ice if you want to, although in certain medicines like Chinese medicine, they say never drink anything cold ever. That they don't want you to do that, so room temperature or warmer. And then I have Canadian friends who swear that if you drink hot things in the summer, it'll make you feel cooler because it stimulates your body to open up your blood vessels and to sweat. And then that cools you down. But I argue with them that you're introducing something hotter into the body, which is just raising your temperature. And
Right.
I, but anyway, they're like, well, it makes you feel cooler. And then they will actually drink cold things in the winter because then it forces their body to warm up. I'm like, no, just going outside in the winter is fine enough for me. My body will be triggered to warm up. But you can play around with hydrotherapy and drinking hot or cold. Either way, you're stepping inside yourself, and this is something that we so need to do, because I feel like we're rushing around like we're floating heads. Do you ever feel
Right.
like you've dissociated from everything below your neck? And you're just ignoring your hunger cues, your thirst cues, you're just ignoring everything until the end of the day. And that's when people stand by the fridge at 11 at night going, I'm hungry, or I have a craving, or it could be thirst. A lot of times people think that they want to have a cigarette or want to have chocolate when their body is just really thirsty and very confused, because you have not tapped into what actual thirst is, or
Right.
what hunger versus craving dopamine, right? So a lot of
And
times
this can be daunting.
it
Like when somebody is being told, "Hey, it's time to tap into your body." This can be a daunting task for a lot of people. If you have a lot of chronic pain, or
mm,
if you've been through trauma that you like, every time you start to notice your body, you start to really reverberate with that trauma. Like that
mm,
can be a very unnerving thing. So, and that's a time where maybe that's time that you need to come talk to me and let's get a plan together. But for general purposes here, I will say that when you start to do this, if you find yourself feeling very uncomfortable or very unnerved, or you start to feel overwhelmed by it, back off and just do a little bit. This
yeah,
doesn't have to be a 30-minute practice, like two
no,
minutes and then, or
yeah,
maybe even 30 seconds, and then come back to it later. And as you begin to increase your capacity for it, it becomes easier and easier to tap into that side of things. And then you're getting where, like what you're talking about, Ashley, with like really being able to cue into those hunger cues and those thirst cues and understanding what the cravings really mean at the base level.
yes. And it's just hold the I'm imagining holding a nice warm cup of tea, because in Washington, where I live, it's like 66 degrees in the morning, and it's
Mm.
78 degrees in the evening. So in the
Oh.
morning, it's very nice to have a cup of hot tea, and then in the afternoon, it's very nice to have iced tea, iced herbal tea. But holding the hot cup of tea of herbs that you've chosen to experience, or one herb, maybe one herb at a time, and just sit there and breathe it. Start by, and we talked about this in the last interview, but just start by closing your eyes, take one breath, and just notice how much tension you can let go. Can you let go
Right.
of the tension in your jaw? Can you let go of the tension in your shoulders? My mom always used to say, don't wear your shoulders as earrings. Can you let go of the tension in your belly, in your chest, in your abdomen, all these muscles? Can you just eat? Can you feel yourself sink into the couch a little bit? I'm not asking 100%, just a little, and just notice how much. If it's 5% good, if it's 10% good, just notice how much you can release in that one breath. And then take a inhale through your nose. Hopefully you're not stuffy, and take an inhale through your nose, and just notice, be aware of the sensation. So I'm not asking you to become aware of your body, like, because just your body alone, because that's, like you said, with trauma, a lot of times people will have racing thoughts and then get agitated by the racing thoughts, or be brought back to things they don't want to think about. But when I'm asking you to focus on your experience of your body in relationship to the experience of the herb, because you're inhaling it, and then just notice how you feel. Become the observer, going, what does that smell like? How does my body relax into that? Do I like it? Do I like the sensation? Do I feel comfortable with this? And then take that sip and just notice, like you said, you notice where it affects you. So obviously you might feel it down your throat, you might feel it in your stomach, but then you might notice other body parts relaxing, enjoying, singing with it, or nothing at all, and that's okay too. And just being with that tea, that herb, taking that moment to disconnect from the world and be with yourself, like you said, could even be 30 seconds. What a great way to start to become aware of your nervous system, because sometimes we are going at 11, like when
Right.
we really want to bring ourselves down to 5. And that is just a beautiful practice, because we can tap into the experience of our body in that moment, of the herb, of our nervous system. A lot of people discredit the importance of your stress, because people don't, they go, stress isn't an emotion, so I'm not stressed. I've had clients say to me, I'm not stressed, and I'm like, okay, so your mom has cancer, you're taking care of 5 family members, you are a manager, you sleep 5 hours a night. Like, I'm listing off all the things, and they go. They never have a day off. They work 7 days a week because they're always taking care of other people. I'm like, you don't feel stress, but your nervous system is in a constant state of stress, meaning that you've shut off processes for long-term health and healing, and you've shut off even access to your logic centers of your brain. So there's so many benefits to just taking a moment and supporting the vagal nerve and tonifying it and coming back into balance. So I love that you introduced that in the last interview, and that you talk about it as we can have a beautiful relationship with these herbs, and also at the same time uh, train ourselves to feel where we are and to bring that calmness back down. And a lot of times people feel like, especially women, say, well, I need the stress in order to do everything I have to do today. Like, they're afraid that if they weren't like go, that then they would just stop, and that they'd lose all motivation or all momentum. And I propose, well, we could definitely talk about herbs that help with that. But I propose that by getting in a calmer state, that we're able to sustain.
So in Western herbalism energetics, you have hot and cold,
Mm-hmm.
damp and dry, tense and relaxed.
Mm.
And a lot of people, the stress that's occurring in an energetic standpoint is tension.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be a balance. We have to find that balance between being atonic, right? Totally relaxed to the point of things like leaky gut. And, in the digestive system, we see more of that atonic relaxation that creates that leaky gut, makes it easier for stuff to get into the body. But in the nervous system, we have the relaxation kind of into that dorsal vagal shutdown response, or we have the tension that takes us into that sympathetic fight or flight response. And a lot of people really need to be able to find that balance and that center. Now, I will say, what people are talking about when they say, oh, I'm afraid that if I let this go, then I'm not going to have the energy. That can happen sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That actually, what we see sometimes when people start healing from trauma is
Mm-hmm.
more of it starts to bubble up when they first start feeling safe, because their body is like, oh, now I'm at a place where I can really work on this.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing when people start to relax, their body goes, oh, I can finally take a nap. And then they want to sleep for 19 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you find yourself in those situations where you're beginning to allow yourself that space to heal, and you start to notice that it's overwhelmingly headed one direction or the other, you can talk to your body about this and say, hey, I have 30 minutes a day set aside for us to work on this. It's going to take a while, but we're going to get there. But we're going to work on this for this 30 minutes a day. And then we have to get back to it so that we can survive. And that kind of thing, for some people, that makes a big difference. It keeps stuff from bubbling up in the middle of the day. It keeps it from feeling like we're just not going to be able to do anything, because now that we're able to relax, our body's just totally given out. Things like that, where you're even acknowledging to yourself. It sounds silly to do that, but if you can just acknowledge to yourself, or even say it out loud, like, okay, I have 45 minutes. I'm going to do a yoga nidra, for instance, like a meditation, a guided meditation. And then I'm going to get back up and I'm going to get back to my day, and recognizing that I'm going to get to do it again tomorrow, or I'm going to do it in a couple of days again. And I am acknowledging this. I am working with this, and I'm working to heal. Sometimes that can keep it from becoming that overwhelming sense of exhaustion that can hit.
Well, that's what I want. I want everyone to have a growing experience of being tuned into their nervous system and tuned into their body, and then have the tools to support their body coming back into balance when they catch themselves off balance, like we do in life, right? Like
Right,
we
right.
always do in life. And then, we're human, and I hear it so often. I, I know I should be, I know all the things I need to do, but I don't do them all the time. And
Right.
then I catch myself and I'm like, oh, I'm over here and I know I know some things I should be doing. So everyone does it. Everyone knows to, I'd hope everyone knows to drink an adequate amount of water. And then sometimes you catch yourself with a dehydration headache and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. Or everyone knows certain things. Like everyone has certain foundations and we forget and then we remember and we go, well, I know I should be doing this and I need to come back. And often it's just because we, we dissociate from our body and we prioritize the do's. Like we're not human doing, we're human being. Right?
Right,
But
right,
we have to do what we have to do to keep the roof over our head and our families fed and take care of our loved ones, and we prioritize. There's a bunch of things we do and we don't put our body first, and our body's our home and
right.
it's our sacred temple. If you're religious, look at all the texts that talk about how it's the God-given temple, right? It is the house you have, and you're not going to get a second one. Not in this lifetime. You're not going to be given a second one. I like to read sometimes. In the past, I read sci-fi, and there was a cool sci-fi book about. It was written by the same author that wrote Like Water for Chocolate, and that is not a sci-fi novel, but her second one was, and it was all about how you could take your consciousness and put it in a new body. And I thought that was what a thing to think about. They also had the prisons were full of love, so that they could, because they thought people that went to prison for doing something wrong, they just really needed to heal, and they needed love. And I mean, it was a really cool, interesting society to think about, sci-fi. But the idea that stuck with me, it's like we don't have the ability to take your consciousness and put it in a brand new body. So why do we take better care of our car than our own body? Right? Why, when the
Right.
check engine light comes on in your car, you're going to drive around for months and months and months and ignore it? Well, so I know some people do, but for the most part, if the check engine light comes on in your body, you're just going to ignore it. And some people just take drugs just to push down the symptoms and ignore it, and put the duct tape over the body's check engine light. But you wouldn't do that for your car. So, or if the fuse box blew in your house, you're going to fix that quickly. But if the if your nervous system kind of starts getting fried, people just want to ignore their body. And this is the body you have, so let's take care of it, let's prioritize it. And learning some herbs
Hmm.
and how to have a healthy relationship with them and use them like a tool to support your body's ability to heal itself is like just prioritizing the only house you have, which is your body.
Right. And when we get into, we look at the rhythm of the seasons,
Mm-hmm.
and there are certain things I'm going to do in the winter that I'm going to do differently in the summer. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're into Ayurveda, there's a lot of discussion around the different elements. And we see this in traditional Chinese medicine as well, right? The elements kind of rule the seasons. So different things are going to be beneficial at different times. People will do different cleanses based on the seasons in order to try to like keep their bodies in that rhythm. And that can be very helpful because we can get off the bandwagon, so to speak, for certain things that could be really beneficial. But if we're constantly looking back to these cycles in nature, whether it be the moon cycle or the seasons or whatever it might be, then we can really help to bring ourselves back to what do we need in this moment. What does our body, with its very unique constitution, with its very unique makeup, what does it need in this moment? And one of the things, I think we may have talked about this last time, one of the things that can be really helpful is what is growing in abundance around me right now? So for me, the very first year, 2020, very first year of the pandemic, lemon balm just exploded.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. It was, as a matter of fact, it was right before I realized anything was actually happening. And I was like, why is my lemon balm? And of course, lemon balm is prolific, right? Like lemon balm, mint, things like that. If you don't want it to scatter across your yard, you definitely keep it in a planter. But I don't mind because I make tea with it and everything. So like I just let it do its thing and I collect it and bring it in. But that year, it particularly went wild in my yard. It took over the mint section. Like I had to really keep it pruned back several different times. And And I understand now why, because when everything hit in March, I was completely like in mental chaos from it all.
Mm.
Not to mention, I was in my master's of public health and I was taking the epidemiology classes as all this was going on. So there's this really weird combination of like learning about things in real time, trying to process everything, trying to understand the what ifs. And that lemon balm tea really made a difference for me and for some other people. It wasn't like I had a lot that was, I was able to pass it around. There's plenty of it. And so sometimes if you, and this isn't necessarily something you're going to catch day one, but as you start to do this and as you start to maybe grow a couple of things, or maybe you're, really getting out there and noticing what you have around you, if one year you notice there's a lot more of a certain plant, pay attention to that. Look at it and see, is this something that I need to look into? Is there something to this? Or like, for instance, I would say probably with you and Mimosa, because it seems like Mimosa's come up a lot for you the last few months. I would maybe dig into that and see, like, is there a relationship to be had there? Anyway, I think it's really interesting to really attune yourself to those rhythms, because sometimes those rhythms can help us to remember different beneficial actions that we can do throughout the year or throughout the month if you're going on the moon cycle. And it also just helps us to become more in tune with how our body is responding to those different things.
I love the idea of looking into the plants that are kind of taking over in your area. I'm thinking about a garden I had back at the same time about you in 2020, and a beautiful vegetable garden that was spontaneously taken over by creeping buttercups. And I get it, when you dry them, they lose their poisonous effects and can be used for several things, but one thing is bronchitis
Mm.
and inflammation. And well, what we were afraid of experiencing was problems with the lungs, right? So
Right.
isn't that interesting? I love nettles. Nettles just explodes in my area. I mean, I accidentally touch nettles. Like
Yeah.
they're just everywhere, and they're just wonderful. I didn't harvest them this year, but in years past, I've harvested them in huge garbage bags, and
Right.
then put them in giant pots of boiling water to get rid of the little needles, the stinging part of the
Right.
nettles, and then made, it's so delicious putting them in a soup, like you would spinach. Make we make like a fermented uh sauce with it. I'm losing the words. We take it and blend it with a little bit of salt and nutritional yeast and pine nuts and garlic, and make a I'm I've lost the word for it, but
Oh no.
it's that kind of green sauce, that Italian green sauce. Why am I not thinking of it?
Pesto.
Pesto, thank you. Yeah. We
Oh.
make a pesto out of it, and then it ferments a bit, because we
Hmm.
make many jars of it, and it's so good. It's so good, and it's so nutritious. And then of course drinking the nettle tea is
Hmm.
wonderful, but don't do it at night because it's a diuretic, and I
Hmm.
learned that the hard way. Be up all night running to the bathroom. But it's so nutritious, and that's something to come back to with herbs. As long as you understand the safety of eating a bunch of it, like with nettles, it's a food as well as an herb.
Right.
You can eat lots of it, but it's in its just its natural form, not like concentrated. It's the moment you concentrate something into a tincture, you have to be more careful of dosages. Um, but eating these herbs is so nutritious. They're superfoods. They're densely nutritious, and that's the part of the medicine as well.
Yes, and it's really important. You were talking earlier about the connection between the gut and the brain, and
Mm-hmm.
how um, the ability to absorb is also part of having all of the beneficial bacteria in your gut. And when we have the right minerals coming in, which nettles are usually highly dense in minerals. Chickweed, which we talked about earlier, is really helpful at absorbing more minerals into the body.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that and we're giving ourselves the trace minerals that we don't normally get, then you're feeding your body, you're feeding your nervous system, but you're also giving the right nutrients to the beneficial bacteria in your gut. Now, if you are somebody who has a tendency to order out a lot, DoorDash has been your best friend. I get it. Been there, done that. Like when I was very fatigued, we had to do that or there wouldn't have been food in the house. But if you're starting to try to turn away from that and you notice like, oh, I really don't feel good after I eat this food that's supposed to be more beneficial for me, a lot of the times that has to do with the less beneficial bacteria beginning to starve, and now it's kind of mad at you and it's releasing sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's a matter of it releasing chemicals into your body to make you feel bad, to make you eat the food that you know isn't as nutritious. And so when you start noticing that, even just adding a couple of more veggies in, adding a couple of things in that are more beneficial and slowly shifting, that can be the way to handle that. And when you do that and you get to a point where you do have these more beneficial herbs getting into your body, and things are more balanced, your inflammation levels usually will start to lower. Well, I think we talked about this last time. Inflammation actually exacerbates trauma. It makes it harder to heal from trauma. So all these little things, getting connected with these different plants, and nettles is a great one. Of course, nettles, you do have to be careful. If y'all are going to go wild crafting nettles, make sure that you're getting it from a good area, soil tested if you need to make sure it's not uptaking the, heavy metals. But usually nettles are great. It's wonderful. And those kinds of things can really make a big difference as to how your body's responding to your attempts at kind of healing the emotional side of things. It's just so much. Like we could just talk about so much.
Yeah, no, I know. I just wanted to pause at this, the healing, healing physical body, also healing mental body, emotional body. We have to understand that they're not separate. Like we like to take off our heads, dissociate from everything else and just be human doing all day. But really we need to we need to understand that our physical body stores trauma, emotional trauma. And I've had episodes with this. I have amazing episode called with a doctor that invented the emotion code. That was really interesting. But that
Yes.
we can, and I remember I was in massage therapy college in Canada. It's like a 5,000 hour program. It's not like a 500 hour
Right.
like little course. Like some
Right.
states, I'm like, what are you going to learn in 500 hours? Like I went to college for 3 years to learn massage therapy. What did you guys, you went for like 2 months?
Yep.
So I mean, everyone does the best they can, but in Canada, in some provinces, massage therapy we're in the hospitals. We're
Right.
alongside the doctors, and I remember working in the Scarborough General Hospital and in Toronto General, working in the upper motor neuron lesion ward, and working with a physical therapist, and it's fascinating when you can plug in as someone who's there to help with rehab, can plug in into a medical system, and that they acknowledge massage, which I mean, of course, it's physical manipulation, but in massage we know that the body is also energy, is also spirit, is
Right.
also is connected to spirit, is also connected to our emotions, connected mentally. It's all connected, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And in massage therapy college, I was on the table and our teacher was showing it a specific technique, and she was isolating my scapula and working up around the back of my underarm, and I burst into tears, and I
Oh,
could not stop crying.
right.
And everyone went to lunch, and she sat with me, and I said, I don't know why I'm crying. I have no, and I'm not a weepy person. I'm a very, I feel like I'm a very strong, like I think of my Russian Polish grandmother who was like strong like bull, like that's and I just think of all the strong women in my family, and I felt like I was one of those. And then she touches a spot that was tender, and it triggered some trauma. And I was crying for an hour, just releasing, just crying and crying, and I had no idea. And that was my real first experience of, oh wow, there's some trauma, and I didn't know that. And it's physical, and it got triggered by something physical. And that was so real. And so I've had these guests talk about how we can clear it from the body. We need to process it and release it, which I do with timeline therapy. Amazing technique to help the body, help the mental body heal. But it's all connected. And so you talk about using herbs. We're healing the body, but we're also connecting to and recognizing that there is an emotional element to this, because it's not separate. We cannot separate one part of ourselves from the other part of ourselves. Um,
Right.
you had mentioned how rhodiola is great for like spaciness, and it reminded me
Hmm.
of how many people. And this is probably just my algorithm when I go on Facebook, but so many people are talking about ADHD. I kind of feel like it's the new buzz term. Like people are recognizing that there's a ADHD spectrum, and so many of us are on it. And that early on in the podcast, in the first 100 episodes, I had people come on and talk about how they were diagnosed with ADHD as a child, and they were put on medication, and then they came to natural medicine, and they were able to kind of like no longer, they quote unquote no longer have ADHD. But really what I'm seeing is it's more of how we process information, and that it can become dysregulated, and through holistic medicine we can become healthier and regulate better, and learn strategies for success. But that ADHD is a real nervous system, regulatory, or how the person sees the world. They say like neurodivergent, but how we process information, how we see the world, how we function. I'm not saying we want to fix it or cure it, but how do we support the mind and the body and the emotional body to function as healthy as possible when feeling like ADHD is dysregulated within someone?
Right. There's a lot of like, matter of fact, there's a joke with some people, is it ADHD or is it trauma? Because a lot of the
Mm,
same or similar symptoms can show as both ADHD and trauma. Like that they're just very similar in a lot of people. And I'm neurodivergent, so I have a lot of the unusual processing, and my brain works a certain way that has created many hilarious stories through the years. For those of you who are old enough to remember Amelia Bedelia, uh,
yeah, I
I had
love it.
I had several moments like that, and I think it's really important to remember that um, there are times where accommodations are the right move. It's not a matter of, like you said, like we're not necessarily looking to heal people. We're not necessarily looking to change somebody's brain from a function that, unusual brains can actually create solutions to things that a neurotypical brain can't.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so there is reason to celebrate that side of things. There's reason to really like embrace that side of things. But neurodivergence and things like ADHD can cause herbs to be a little bit different. I have a friend that she works primarily with people with ADHD because she also has ADHD. And the way that the herbs work for her subset of the population is a little bit different. It's a little
Mm.
like, it's like caffeine, right? Like some people, the
Hmm.
caffeine really makes them focus, and other people it can make them really, really hyper really fast. And so like and so she has a slightly different way of using the herbs with people based off of a certain diagnosis, or a certain type of neurodivergence. And that is more of the reason why taking the time to learn about the herbs in relation to you and
Hmm.
your specific experience on this planet is so important. Because if you are able to do that, because I can tell you all day long, like why I prefer Asian ginseng over rhodiola in these certain situations. Like we could get into all of that, nitpicky conversation, which is fun. And I love it for research, right? Like you can get into a lot of really interesting things. But at the end of the day, what your experience is with your plants is what is going to help inform your healing process. And
Ah,
so I really have gotten to, yeah, like I love helping people to really dig into that. And that's part of what this class is all about, is
mhm.
really opening up that experience so that you can start to figure out what this means for you and how this is going to help you on this journey that is our experience here on earth.
Beautiful. I love it. And I love that you brought up that um with again, that's that spectrum of
Right.
ADHD, because so many of them, my husband included, he could drink a venti and fall asleep. I drink a venti, I'm up for 3 days. Like,
Right.
we process, our bodies will process stimulants differently. Now, he, on the other end, if he drinks caffeine on the other end of sleep, he'll fall asleep on caffeine, but he'll wake up at 5 in the morning.
Right.
So I know that it's definitely affecting his melatonin and his stress hormones on the other end of sleep. But he can fall asleep on caffeine. I cannot fall asleep on caffeine
Nope.
to save my life, right?
Mm-mm.
He
Yeah, I
processes
can't
pain
either.
meds differently.
Right.
He has to tell the anesthesiologist, like, these are my things, right? Like, he has to tell the anesthesiologist, or they usually ask these kind of questions. But when it comes to like local anesthesia for tooth stuff, he has to say to the dentist, listen, you have to give me twice as much as you think you need to give me, and you have to ask me in half the amount of time you think you need to ask me if I'm feeling something, because I my body processes pain meds way faster than you think. And he'll
Right.
say this. He'll give the whole speech to the dentist. They won't believe him. And
Yep.
then, like, in 10 minutes, he's like, ow, 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 that hurts. And they're like, well, I just, it already kicked in. I gave you the stuff. And then he's like, no, 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 you don't understand. You have to give me more. And his nervous system, his body, his clearance, whatever it is, he processes herbs a little differently. He processes stimulants a little differently. He falls asleep on stimulants. So yeah, we've got to check in with ourselves. And that's why I like starting with something simple like a tea, something gentle, and then working your way up to the stronger ones should you need it.
Right.
Love it. But is there, off the top of your head, is there like oh yeah, these adaptogens are always good for ADHD people, or oh yeah, like it's like, do you have like the Ritalin of the herbal world that you could come on, give me the quick
No.
fix. Give me the
No.
blanket. Give me the blanket good for everyone. I'm sure there's got to be one out there, right? Is there?
Right. No.
No,
No, it is interesting. Now, I will say that the stimulating adaptogens like rhodiola or Asian ginseng tend to be the ones that I see helpful when somebody has an ADHD diagnosis. But I
Mm,
don't always reach for that, because just because you have an ADHD diagnosis doesn't mean that you're always in a dorsal vagal state.
mm-hmm.
There may be other things happening, but that dorsal vagal shutdown that causes us to feel more spacey, it causes us to be a little dissociated, is sometimes part of that ADHD experience. And so it makes sense that rhodiola and Asian ginseng can be helpful. But everybody is a little bit different. And I really like, my life would be easier if I could name stuff off and just be like, this is it, boom, fix it, right? Like, I'd be rich. But that's just not how it works. And this is part of what this class is for, right? Like, we're going to talk about different herbs, different adaptogens and nervines, which nervines tend to be things like the lavender, the chamomile that we talked about earlier, which I
Mm-hmm.
think we talked about in the
Mm-hmm.
last session as well. And we're going to talk about some of those, get a little more in depth on them. And then we're going to be doing these guided visualizations where you're actively tapping into your subconscious and you're really trying to discover more about what your body is telling you in this moment in a way that allows you to also connect with nature. And so in those moments, I'm going to give you some information. I'm going to give you some ideas around, how to stay as safe as possible based on what we're talking about. But then we're also going to get into that intuitive space. So we've got our boundaries set up, and now we can just play in that intuitive space within these safe boundaries. And that's where the real healing comes from. I know, we call ourselves healers, but the reality is I'm just kind of a facilitator. I'm just telling you these things and letting you understand what we've learned, and then trying to help you create space for your body to tell you what it is that you need in these moments.
Mm-hmm.
again, when somebody's
Beautiful.
got chronic illness and things like that, like, yeah, there's more nuance to it, and we can work one on one and talk about that. But in general, having the space to explore, in my mind, is one of the most powerful ways that you can find what works best for you and your situation.
And you're teaching a person to fish rather than
Right.
giving them the fish. You go to a doctor, or like a even a doctor of natural medicine, they're just going to say take this, this and this, and they might tell you what it does, but there isn't a huge education piece, or at least teaching you how to intuit and listen to your body. The body speaks to us, and it really does tell us what we need, but we're floating heads. We've cut ourselves off, and we really haven't been trained to tap in and listen to our body. One of my mentors is an old school naturopathic physician in his 80s, and he devised a way, and he trained me in this. He devised a way to understand nutrient deficiencies based on the symptoms the body's speaking.
Yes.
So I can talk to someone for 10 minutes and say, okay, these are the nutrients your body is saying it's missing, based on, having a conversation with someone. And we didn't need to do expensive blood tests and hair analysis and all that. And so it's interesting that we can look at it from the physiological, okay, like muscle cramps, problems staying asleep, that kind of thing, urinating in the middle of the night, falling asleep after meals, like weird symptoms, eye twitches, right? You can give me all kinds of interesting symptoms, and then I could say, okay, these five symptoms are all related to the same problem, and I explain why. But beyond that, it's impressive for you to learn, to the individual. When I say you, I mean the person listening to this on the other end. Hello, for you to learn, just like for me to learn how my body responds and what it needs. And so your body will buzz and love the feeling of an herb when it's good for it. Like I made that tea, that turbo tea that I've been really drawn to make. Um, I mean, I've made it before in the past. I just haven't I kind of go through phases where I'll drink it for a while and then I'll, move on to something else. But I was really drawn to it for a while. So I'm like, okay, it's time to make it. And we love it, and my body buzzes and loves it, and it feels so good when I drink it, and I'm really called to it. Like my body just says, this is what I want. And when you tap into yourself and you learn, like Elizabeth teaches you how to listen to yourself, your body's going to say what it needs. Now, this is a good feeling. The good feeling you get is not the artificial good feeling you get from sugar, from cocaine, from not like yes, everyone's done cocaine. No, but you know what I mean? Like some people think about street drugs like, oh, it's very artificial, but they feel good. Right? They
Right.
quote unquote feel good. Alcohol. So many people say, but wine is healthy for you. There's antioxidants, there's resveratrol. I'm like, then eat the grapes. Like you don't need
Right.
the toxin. But I feels good after I drink alcohol. I'm like, yes, and so do street drugs, but you don't do them. Now I'm not like, listen, I'm not. If you want to drink alcohol, I'm not judging. I'm just letting people know it's like there's a difference between the artificial feel good, which is a harmful, and then the really healthy for you, that buzzing. Like if you're to drink organic juice, freshly made juice drink, and now all your cells are filling with an abundance of vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and antioxidants. That feeling, that good feeling when your body buzzes, it's so delicious, it's so wonderful. But again, you
Hmm.
have to reattach your head and allow yourself to start to tap in and listen to your body. And it's like a muscle. So at first you might not know, right? You might not be aware of your body or know. The more you do it, the more you'll strengthen that muscle till you'll get a feeling for, you're just go, oh wow, my body's saying to me it wants some peppermint tea. I'm just, as an example, like you just feel at the end of the day like, oh wow, I could really use this at the end of the day to kind of bring myself down into a nice state. Or maybe, oh, in the morning I feel like chai and all the herbs that could be put in a chai. And doesn't even have to be caffeine. If you want, you could just do all the herbs in a nice warmed milk kind of thing, nut milk or whatever. But the point is, tapping into the body and listening is this beautiful thing. That, and I love that you
Right.
emphasize this, because not many practitioners do. Not many practitioners teach people how to be their own physician, in a sense, how to, because their body's the one that's telling them what they need.
Right. Well, and I think it's important to recognize that talking about some of the stuff you're talking about, like with wine and feeling good, a lot of the times we are chasing the excitement of feeling blissed out or feeling powerful.
Mm.
So, like, a lot of the times when somebody is like angry or frustrated all the time, it's that feeling of power that like keeps them going to that.
Wow.
Or if we're trying our hardest to almost like disconnect and ignore what's happening, the things that are happening with us, we're chasing that sensation of being blissed out and the excitement of being blissed out. And the reality of our human experience is that it is cyclical, like nature is cyclical. There are going to be highs, there are going to be lows. And when we can approach it from that place of equanimity, then we are better equipped to experience those highs and lows in a way that gives us the full spectrum of the human experience without the overwhelm. And plants offer us a way to really buffer so that we have that tolerance to stay in a state of equanimity more often.
That's really beautifully said. And we're chasing the artificial stimulants because we've dissociated from that and we don't have that equanimity, right? So
Right.
so you're teaching us how to really get the true highs, feeling the true healthy highs in
Right.
life by getting back into our bodies.
But I wouldn't even call it a high. Like, and this might be kind of a disappointment for some people. Like, sorry, but like when we're chasing the highs of it, it could, like, a lot of people chase the high of success, right? They chase the high of I got this done, or I can check this list off, or I can, I watched this TV show and it gave me that artificial high, or like, ooh, I'm going to feel so blissed out all the time because I'm just on top of the world. Like, the high that we get from natural things, I would almost call it a, what is the word I want here? Because it's not even a high. It is like a deep knowing. It is a deep understanding that you are exactly where you're supposed to be.
Wow.
And you can't crash from that the same way you can crash from the high of success.
Wow. For me, it's a joy because
Right.
I remember being sick for so many years.
Right.
And when I wake up in the morning and I jump out of bed and I don't have aches and pains and I don't have brain fog and I don't have a headache and I don't have like this gross feeling like a prisoner trapped in a sick body. When I jump out of bed and I am on and I start my day and I love my life and I love my family. I mean, nothing is necessarily. I've got lots of stuff I want to improve in my life. Don't get me wrong. Like,
Right.
I'm not,
Right.
I'm there's definitely a few things that's like, I want to be better. But I guess what I bring in within the first moments of me being awake is I have a sense of gratitude throughout every cell in my body because I remember being sick and suffering. Never to the point where I wanted to die, but to the point where I wanted a new body.
Right.
I
And
dreamed
you
about.
have the tools where
Yeah.
if that happens again, you don't fall into despair. You
Mm.
know, okay, I can do this. Like, you
Yes.
still have that gratitude, and you still have, may not be the same level of joy that you have in a moment where you feel fully and complete, but you still have that ability to know, okay, I know where I need to go. It's not the same thing as the despair that can happen after those artificial crashes. And that's what I love about what we're doing with natural things.
Love it. That's beautiful. So there is a spiritual, an emotional, and a mental, and an energetic component to physical
Right.
health, and we have to acknowledge that and just know the body as a whole. The body's all of those things, and
Right.
that is life. And that's why I say like the Learn True Health podcast is not just learning true physical health, right? It's so we'll have guests on about homeschooling and about relationships and about healthy workplace, and it's because it's life. You can't Nothing in your life and body happens in a vacuum. Your
Right.
your body can be affected by every aspect of your life, right? So that's health. Health is bringing awareness and balance to every and joy and gratitude to every aspect of your life. And let's not be afraid of plants. Let's use them because they're given to us. They're surrounding us. They're here for our use, and it's a tool that we got to tap into for optimal health. And those people who are preppers, who are afraid of something bad happening in the future, it's very real. Just over 100 years ago, there was a solar storm that took out, it was so bad, it took out it melted the wires that they were using to send communications. Why am I forgetting the name of it? Dang it. The D. Why am I
The
forgetting
towers?
the name?
The radio towers? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it wasn't radio. It was back then. It was, why am I forgetting the name? Anyways, everyone's yelling the name
telegraph.
right now.
Telegraph. D.
Thank you.
It took a second for me to realize what you were doing. Telegraph.
Okay, so what herb do I need? Because my brain is forgetting words. I'm like the rest of the day I'm going out and like being in the sun with friends at a pool. So I think my brain's like, goodbye.
Yeah,
my brain's like walked
It's
out
at
the
pool
door,
already.
slams the door. It's already at the pool. Okay.
I love it.
So anyways, God, it's so funny. So the solar storm made the dee go away, and thank goodness. I mean, we haven't had one, but it could happen again, and it would completely melt and destroy all electronics that whatever part of the earth was facing the sun at the time. And we'd only have about 8 minutes warning because it takes 8 minutes for the solar storm to hit us. So right. Not even like prepper end of times, like nuclear fallout, or all the kinds of things to talk about, but just God forbid. And I don't want you to imagine this too long because it would cause anxiety, but imagine something happens and we are left with no communications and the world's a little bit chaotic because there's no electricity. What do? Do you know how to go into your backyard and pick some herbs and do some medicine for yourself, your family? Do you know how to forage food? Like, do you know the basics of survival? And that's not whack job crazy to think about. Now, I don't want anyone to be obsessed about it and be like worried about it every day, because again, that's not healthy. But just taking some time to learn basic survival skills, foraging skills, learn basic, herbal medicine of your region is intelligent. And if you have children, do it with them, like learn together and there's lots in our area. There's lots of local foragers that'll take you into the woods and teach you the good plants from the not good plants. Like, don't eat those, eat these. And that's something that I think we should all just have an understanding of. And I love that you take it to a level of let's support the emotional body's ability to heal along with the physical, which is something that, like I said, I don't see many people doing. And so I really like that you're focusing in on that.
No, I agree. And I don't even think it has to be as catastrophic as something like that. I mean, it could be as simple as like what's happened with the eggs, right? I mean, now it's back to normal here. Like our prices are back down to normal. But for a minute there, it was a luxury to have eggs. Mm-hmm. And, things can happen in the supply chain. And,
yes,
but whether it does or doesn't, the thought of being more connected and more aware of my surroundings is important to me. Feeling a little bit self-sufficient, feeling a little bit like I can walk outside, and instead of being like aggravated at the bugs or like annoyed by the different weeds that are growing, instead I can walk out there and I can see the magic, the beauty that is our universe, and being able to connect into that on a physical level from the self-sufficiency angle, but also the emotional level, and just be able to reconnect to things that are going to be here hundreds of years after I'm gone. There's something to that is powerful and emotionally healing as well as physical healing. And whether you choose to come to check out the free introductory event and get a little taste, I'm going to do a guided visualization kind of meditation type thing in this event. But whether you choose to do that or not, I hope that you will go outside and start to notice the things that are around you. Maybe get a plant ID app and start trying to see, like, take a picture of that plant, see if it brings up the right plant, check it and make sure that it, matches up. Just start learning those little things that can teach you more about what you have in your area.
I'm thinking about Pokemon Go, which I never signed up
Ah,
for because the moment it came out, I just know me and I have an addictive personality.
right.
And I chose never to install that app because I knew if I did, I probably wouldn't have even done the podcast. I'd be out there. I mean, maybe I'd be like a hiker because I'd be walking everywhere. That'd be good. But I kind of knew it would take over my life, so I didn't do it. But I'm imagining like a Pokemon Go, but with plants where
Yes.
you're, I mean,
Ah.
like, just like you like make it fun, right? Like geotagging or something, make it fun. Be like, like how they do bird watching, right? They're like, you have to find these 10 birds. Like, imagine it's kind of like,
Yes.
I'm going to learn about 5 new plants today in the wilderness of my park nearby or whatever, right? Like you could kind of make it a game
It's like
and
geocaching with plants.
geocaching a Pokemon Go, but with plants. Right.
I
So get a
love
plant
it.
identifier app and then just make a goal, like, or get the family together and they all get their phones in this app. And it's like, okay, the first person to identify 10 new plants today wins, or, like a scavenger hunt.
Right.
And it's learning and it's walking and it's fun. So, and then maybe pick something. Maybe you have to pick them too, like a little bit just to bring it home or something. I don't know. I'm a homeschooler, mom, right? So I'm thinking about all these like,
Yes.
ooh, I could totally do that with my homeschool group.
Right. And you
Uh,
don't even have to. So I know a lot of people, especially since like I have this long COVID that has really limited my movement. It's gotten a
mm,
lot better, but for a hot minute it was scary how limited my movement was. And so if you're stuck inside, or if you're wheelchair bound and you can't get out into a park, or like at Oak Mountain State Park here, there's no way you could get a wheelchair up half the trails. But if that's happening to you, you can still connect with these things. There's all kinds of ways. Teas alone can ingesting the tea is a form of connection. But you can also
mm,
watch videos with the different plants. You can look out a window and see the plants that are around you. Like, there are ways to still connect with those vibrations that don't necessarily have to be totally hands-on. So like whatever it is, whether you're able to gamify it like what Ashley's talking about, or if it's just something that you have to, adjust these practices are pretty accessible for almost anybody. And I encourage you that if you haven't heard something that totally resonates with you today, play with it, sit on it, maybe meditate on it if you have time. How can I begin to connect more deeply with these plants? If you have a lot of severe allergies and you're afraid of drinking a tea, then maybe like what we are talking about earlier with the flower essences, that is an energetic signature. There is no physical component of the plant left in a flower essence, and maybe that's how you begin to connect. There's all
mm-hmm.
kinds of different ways, and when you find the right thing for you and you find the right way for you to go, then it when it clicks like that, it makes a world of difference.
Love it. Listeners can go to learnchild.com/plants to check out the free introductory event where Dr. Elizabeth Guthrie, Ph.D.,
Oh,
is going to be teaching the awesome stuff we've talked about today, and share with your friends too. Send them to learnchild.com/plants. Share it with your friends. Go check it out together. Go plant geocaching together. Make tea.
yes.
We talked about that every friend gets in the last episode. Every friend gets like a different tea herb, and then we all get together and have a little tea party. And experience it together. You can make it fun. You can do it with friends. You can do it with if you have mom friends, if you do it with your sisters or your family, your neighbors, and if you're not near your friends, you guys can get on a video call together, and everyone can sip their tea on a video call together and talk about it.
Yes.
We can make it communal, or if you're an introvert, then just do it alone in the corner, wrapped around a blanket. Like like my husband would be totally happy being all alone, wrapped in his blanket with his tea. It's however you are comfortable. Let's enrich our lives with these plants. And thank you for coming on the show today again and sharing. This is beautiful, and I love that you're giving us another tool for emotional mental healing along with physical healing. And I really, really appreciate that, especially in these times when we're all looking to come back into the healthiest versions of ourselves.
And this is the perfect time for us to do this. If we can really take responsibility at this point for the healing from the chaos of the last few years, and if we can really take the time to reconnect to nature and to reconnect to ourselves and our bodies and what we need for emotional and physical healing, we set ourselves up to really be able to support our communities and offer healing overall for the next several years. Like, I think this is the perfect time as the dust is settling to set ourselves up to be as healed as possible so we can take care of each other and create the kind of communities that allow us to feel supported and loved.
Brilliant. Beautiful. learntruehealth.com/plants. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank
And let's
you.
have you on again when you've, published your next book or your next course, you've got more to teach. Would love to have you back.
Always. Thanks.